G'day. Today we're talking about recruitment and growth in the Society for Creative Anachronism. My name is Tony Swallow. In this society, I'm the Honourable Lord Johann Schwalbe. I first put this presentation together over a decade ago and presented it at a number of events. And I did always intend to make a video out of it, but it ended up on the shelf for a while. More recently, I've pulled it out and had a look at it, and a few things have changed since then in my mind. So a few things have come out of the presentation, a few things have gone into the presentation. So what this is just a collection of thoughts and concepts that are pertaining to recruitment and growth, and they're based on my experiences. So here's a picture of me from over a decade ago, wearing a much newer, cleaner and nicer gambeson than it became. And I have a certain amount of experience in recruitment and growth in the SCA. I was a founding member of the College of St Basil the Great and also the Shire of Bosenberg. So let's have a look a bit at the SCA. So the SCA started in the United States over 50 years ago, and it has grown to become a worldwide organisation with thousands of people involved across the entire globe. Compared to many other medieval interest organisations, it is really, really big. And a question that one has to ask is, why is it the SCA is so big compared to other organisations of a similar ilk? And there's a number of reasons in my mind. One is that there's a low entry level to getting involved in the SCA. Another is that the SCA has developed a system of governance and administration that enables numerous groups to exist, all underneath the same banner. And within that administration and culture, people can travel from place to place, and the SCA that they play in will be familiar to where they came from, because a lot of things are either similar or the same. So the fighting that we do is very similar across the known world. The way we recognise people is very similar across the world, and the way we do things is very similar across the world. So if you're involved in the SCA in Lockhart, for example, where I am, and you decide to go to Penzic, then you can go out into the warfield wearing the same armour that you'd be wearing in Lockhart and be able to play exactly the same game. So this is really a very, very strong point for the SCA that has enabled it to grow. So, simple question, why should we even recruit in the first place? And there's a number of reasons why people might recruit. They might want to get more people into a war band or maybe into a household. It might be that they want to have more people who are doing something that they have a particular interest in. It could be dancing, could be archery, could be rapier combat, whatever it might be. Also, a common reason that people take a lot of interest in recruitment and group growth is because they want to change group status. So they want to grow, for example, a shire into a barony. For myself, the simple reason to recruit is to grow the SCA. So for myself, if whatever I am doing means that there are more people getting involved in the SCA, regardless of what they might be doing within the SCA, this is a good outcome. So who should be doing the recruiting? And there's lots of people involved in the SCA and they have lots of different roles. So should it be the kings and queens because, you know, they're at the top of the whole pyramid? Should it be the peers because they've been here for a long time and they do a lot of stuff? Maybe it should be your barons and baronesses of your local groups because they're the local leaders of their local groups. Maybe it should be the hospitaller. Because, you know, it's obviously their job to do all the recruiting in their group. A lot of groups don't have a hospitaller, so does that mean that the seneschal should be doing it? So my answer to that is everyone has a role in recruitment, retention and group growth within the SCA. The role may vary in various ways, but we all should be conscious of it. So another common question that comes up is, what sort of demographics should we be targeting? Should we target university students? Because a lot of people come into the SCA through colleges, which are predominantly university-based groups with university students. Should we look at all the blue-collar workers? Because they're not coming through universities. Maybe we should look at single mums, because they've got kids and they can grow up in the SCA and they can become members as well. That guy down the road who's really into movies about Braveheart and things like that. Americans, well, the SCA started in America, so obviously an American would be interested. How about your best friend from high school? Like, if you're doing something you enjoy, surely you want to do it with someone that you enjoy doing things with. And once again, my answer to this question is everyone. So if you meet anyone in your life who has an interest in medieval history, an interest in medieval activities, and would fit into the SCA, then they're a potential person that could be recruited and involved in the SCA. Now, the next thing I want to share is my concept of coin. And quite often discussions about recruitment, growth and retention sort of revolve around time and money and effort and so on and so forth. And often the discussions can take a lot of time going around in circles around the same points. So what I do is I just aggregate all these various bits and pieces into one concept which I call coin. So the 5 elements of coin are time. How much time do you have to devote to your hobby? Effort. How much effort can you devote to your hobby? And in this sense, we're talking about your normal base load. So this is going to your training session once a week, going to the stitch and bitch session once a fortnight, going to the meeting once a month or once every other month. It's that normal load of effort that you have to put in. The next one is energy, and this is about your peak load. So if you can imagine that you're running an event, you might have to devote a lot of your time and effort and a lot of your energy to running that event for a period of time, but once the event's over, then it goes back to normal. The next one is money, and that's really, really simple. How much money do you have to spend on your hobby? And the last one, and this is really important, is emotion. So you are emotionally invested in some way in the hobbies that you do. So why is coin important to recruitment and growth? So first of all, people have a limited coin. So we all have a certain amount of time, effort, energy, money and emotion that we can devote to our hobbies. If people perceive that the amount of coin they have to expend is higher than what they can, then they won't get involved in something. And one of the strengths of the SCA is that the entry-level requirement is quite low. You can get involved fairly quickly and fairly easily with relatively little expenditure in time and money and so on. When situations change and people have less coin to spend on their hobby, then they will stop, fairly obviously. And any number of circumstances could change. You might move to another location where there is no SCA. You might have an elderly relative who needs a lot of care and you can't devote the same amount of time. However, if somebody leaves because the coin expenditure has become too high, then when that changes, the situation changes again, then often they will come back to the SCA. So in the terms of time, effort, energy and money, when that situation changes, they come back. The exception there, however, is emotion. So if somebody has a bad experience or a number of bad experiences and they decide that the SCA is not the place for them on an emotional level, then often that is a permanent change and they go away. And unfortunately, it's also damaging because when they discuss their experience of the SCA with other people, then what they're discussing is a negative experience that they've had emotionally in whatever way it was. And other people that they interact with will have a negative impression of the SCA. So let's have a look at some of the tools of recruitment, and I divide these into two broad categories. You have your active types of tools, which are direct, and you have your passive tools, which is more about marketing type things. So with your active tool set, you can objectively measure the success, so you can count how effective was whatever it was we did. They typically are high coin expenditure, and often you'll be targeting specific people, groups, demographics, and so on. With your passive tools, it's harder to measure a success. They're lower coin, and they target everybody. So with the active ones, it's something you're doing very specifically, trying to get these people involved in the SCA. With your passive/marketing stuff, it's where you're casting things out into the ocean and seeing what comes in. So your active tools are your demos and your word of mouth. It's all about direct interaction with the people on a personal level. And your passive ones are things like flyers and mass media, where you're getting it out there and hopefully they're coming into you. So flyers, let's have a look at those. Flyers can be simple, they can be easy, they can be low coin expenditure. So you do up your flyer, you run it through the photocopier 100 times, you leave it in the dashboard of your car. And when you fill up at the servo, you go in there and you say, do you mind if I put this up in the window? When you go to the corner store, you say, do you mind if I just pop this up in your window? You go to the local library, can I pop this up in your notice board? It just sits there, it's nice and passive, you don't really have to think about it much, you just ask to put it up wherever you can. One question is, what is the best kind of flyer? You know, in terms of what should you put on it? Should be showing the fighting, the dancing, the brewing? Huge questions. And my answer is really simple. The flyer that works best is the one that's actually up there. So it's more important that you just get flyers up there than to pontificate about what they should actually look like. Now, one of the things about people who contact you via a flyer is that they're actually taking an active step forwards. So they've seen that flyer in the library, in the shop window, whatever, they think themselves, oh yeah, medieval type stuff, that sounds like my sort of a bag. So they call you up or you send you an email. This comes out of the blue. You have no connection with them whatsoever. It's really important that you look after these people who contact you through a flyer because they've already made that first step. Now it's your turn to step forward to meet them in the middle. Now let's have a look at various mass media. So first of all, getting it out there in some way is a good thing. As long as the message that is getting out there is positive, that's a good thing to get out there. So let's look at newspapers. So let's just imagine that the editor of the local paper calls you up and says, oh, we're doing an article, we saw a bunch of people hitting each other in the park, looks very exciting, we want to do a little article. It's a fantastic opportunity, you know. 4th page of the newspaper, what a great thing. Another possibility is radio. It could be that somebody wants to do a little radio interview, play a little bit of Monty Python music. You know, there's this medieval group in town, sounds pretty cool. Again, getting out there would be absolutely awesome. Let's look at the TV. Now, advertising on TV is pretty much above any sort of group's budget, but again, there might be an opportunity in a lifestyle show or something like that for us to showcase the SCA, and if you can do that, that's fantastic. It means that lots and lots of people could potentially see it. And last but not least, we have the internet, and the internet is actually really important because it's a great way to potentially get in contact with a lot of people in a passive way. Just a word of note and caution though is that whatever you are doing in terms of various mass media, please make sure that you're doing it in accordance with your Kingdom Media policy. So don't do anything there that maybe you shouldn't be doing. Websites. So websites are a great way to allow people to get in contact with you in the first instance and to inform them once they have. So websites ideally should be simple. So it should be nice and easy for someone to look at that website. It should be nice and easy for them to navigate around that website. And lastly, but possibly most importantly, is that the website should be up to date. So in my mind, it's more important that you have really good up-to-date information than it is to have a really fancy website. So things like email addresses for contacts, they should be kept up to date. It would be very, very frustrating if somebody finds your website, thinks that's fantastic, sends out an email and it comes up with no response. And if you are a contact on a website, check that junk mail folder because that's where stuff can end up. Special note for social media. And this is one thing that has changed in the last 10 years or so. So 10 years ago, Facebook was a thing. Nowadays, it's pretty much an ingrained part of our lives, and social media can be very advantageous. So it has far-reaching links, so you can connect with people that you haven't met or seen in person for the last 25 years. It can also enable new people to participate right now. So somebody can find the SCA, sign up to their local group Facebook group, they can sign up to special interest Facebook groups, and they can get a sense of participation right from the outset. They can ask questions that can be answered by any number of people online. Another advantage of social media is that it's easier for people who are geographically removed to be involved in the SCA. So a common reason that someone leaves the SCA is they go somewhere where there is no SCA, and other interests and hobbies then come to the fore, and unless they move back somewhere where there's the SCA, then they stop playing. If they're involved in the SCA as a social media platform, Facebook for example, then they will maintain that contact, or may maintain that contact. One cautionary note though about social media is that it's a great medium for conversation, sharing pictures, this is my project, all that sort of stuff. But it's not a fantastic platform for organisation and should not be used as a replacement for websites, email lists, newsletters, and those sorts of things where we communicate the organisational aspect of what we do. Let's have a look at demos. So the first thing about demos is that they are coin intensive. It takes as much effort to organise a demo as it might take to organise a tournament. However, it does give you an opportunity to get out there and showcase what the SCA is all about, which is having fun in the current Middle Ages. And in doing so, you get to have that nice direct interaction with the public. People can come along, they can see what you're doing, they can ask questions, they can find out about you. And in doing so, you may collect names, phone numbers, email addresses, etc. So you can contact the people later on. So let's just imagine that somebody comes along and they say, wow, this looks fantastic. I do a lot of brewing. I'm really interested in brewing. That's what I like to do. More brewing. Brewing in the current Middle Ages. So you might say, okay, well, we've got our Brewers Guild meeting on next month. Would you like to come along? Yes, I'd love to come along. All right, well, give me your phone number. I'll give you a call next week, and you can come along to our Brewers Guild meeting. However, if you do that, then follow-up is absolutely critical. So what you don't want to happen is have someone come along, have that conversation, they all get enthused, you're going to send them an email about the details for the feast that's coming up in 2 months' time, and then they never get that email. That will be a loss in the sense of running that demo. Another thing to think about with demos is that different people have different strengths and weaknesses. Some of us are extroverts, and getting out there, dressing up in front of the public is something that we can do comfortably and naturally. Others are not. So you want to take that into consideration with organising a demo. Let's just imagine you've got someone who's somewhat more introverted, they don't really want to be talking to the public, but they're happy to come along and participate and do something. If, for example, they're into fighting, then they can be out in the middle of the list field doing the fighting bit. They're still contributing, but they're not actually having to do something that they're not 100% comfortable with. Another thing to think about is who's best at what things. I tend to be a loud, shouty, spruiky sort of a person. I'm also a fighter. So if we've got half a dozen fighters at a demo, and I'm the best person for doing the spruiking, then it's probably better that I'm out there in front of the crowd, getting them all roared up about the fighting that's happening, than to be out in the field with a sword and board in my hand. Last but not least is that you want to make sure that your participants are rewarded and recognised. So doing demos can be a lot of fun, but doing demos is also work. You have to spend your coin to do it. So you want to make sure that people are appreciated for the contribution that they make to the entire effort. Word of mouth. Now, I don't have any statistics, but I would hazard a guess that the most common way for someone to come into the SCA is because someone in their life, a friend, a family member, a colleague, has told them all about it. And they've got enthused about the idea. This sounds like the sort of thing that they'd be interested in. Can I come along? And of course that person says, yes, of course you can come along. You can borrow my tea tunic. I'll lend you some feasting gear. You should come along and check this out. You'd enjoy the dancing. The corollary of that is that if somebody goes to an event and they don't have a good time, say they're ignored or someone's rude to them or something like that, then when they're talking to their friends, family and colleagues, then they're going to be sharing that negative experience. So it's really important when new people come along that you want to make sure that they go away with a positive experience about the SCA, even if ultimately they're not interested in it. Every time you have a conversation with someone in your mundane life about the SCA, you're an ambassador of the FCA. So ask yourself the question, what do you represent? Are you painting a good, positive picture of this? So for the next bit, I'm going to discuss the idea of 3 layers of involvement in the SCA. So we've got our newcomers, we've got a middle rank, and then we have our long-termers. So let's have a look at newcomers. Newcomers are people who are new to the SCA. Let's just imagine they've been around for a couple of years or less. They're getting together their first garb, they're getting together their armour, they're getting into brewing. They're the sorts of people who will need a lot of help, and they'll be attending classes and so on and so forth. They may or may not have received local awards, may or may not have received an AOA. Key thing here is that these are people that you are still investing coin into. Then you have your middle rank. These people are people who've been around somewhat longer. They probably have received awards of arms or maybe other awards. They're starting to really achieve in whatever area of specialty that they've decided that they're specialising in. And it could be that they've even started to teach. They're also the sorts of people who are thinking about running events and taking on offices. So the key thing here is that at worst, they are coin neutral. They are starting to generate coin within the SCA. And then last but not least, we have our long-termers. So these are people who've been around for quite a while. They probably have been recognised for their achievements. They may have pointy hats. They often have long titles. They've become a subject matter expert for whatever it is that they're into. They're often a go-to person in their local area. There's actually an expectation that they're going to be teaching others. Key thing here is that they are positively generating coin for their group and the SCA as a whole. So let's look at ways that a group might choose to expend that coin that they generate. So first of all, we've got one end of the scale, which is enriching the group. And these are the sorts of things where you're improving your group assets. So making banners, putting together loaner armour. You might be putting a focus on authenticity. You might be having themed events, themed competitions. You are making things bigger, better and shinier. Then at the other end of the scale, we've got activities which widen the base. So these are your recruitment activities, your follow-up activities, various workshops to assist new people, and various activities that assist newcomers. So newcomer feasts, newcomer tournaments, newcomer competitions. So it could be that you run an ANS competition, which only people who have not won an ANS competition before can enter. So both enriching the group and widening the base are important. And the key thing here is balance. So let's just have a look at what might happen if you don't do any activities whatsoever to widen the base. So I've got this nice little pyramid here, newcomers down the bottom, long-termers at the top. Lots of newcomers, less long-termers. And the thing is, if you don't do any recruitment activity whatsoever, you don't do anything to widen the base whatsoever, things actually get better. So the people down the bottom of the pyramid, they slowly move up in the pyramid, their garb gets better, their fighting gets better, they get more awards, they get more recognition, but eventually we end up with this little column here. And if we continue to go down this same path, then the bottom starts to shrink. And the thing is that nobody stays in the SCA forever. We all eventually leave for some reason, hopefully positive ones, but eventually everybody does leave. And if you don't introduce any new people at all, then eventually what happens is that your group shrinks. So the next concept I'm going to discuss is that of potential member interfacing and the value of newcomers and new people in recruiting in the SCA. So first of all, people who are new to the SCA are often quite enthusiastic about it. They've found something that's new and exciting, they want to share it with their friends and family, and that enthusiasm rubs off. Now, when we're showing people the SCA, it is quite important that we show people the top end of the scale. It's good that people can see how fantastic and evolved our fighting is. It's good that people can see how advanced costuming is. It's also really good that people look at whatever crafts that people have done to an absolute high level. But equally important is that people see the steps in progression to get there. So if all you see is the top end shiny stuff, then it lacks a certain amount of accessibility. Someone looks at it and they sort of say, that looks amazing, but I don't know if I could do that. Whereas if one of the people or some of the people that they're interacting with newcomers, then they'll see what they're doing and they'll say to themselves, actually, that's accessible to me. You know, so someone's showing them the tea tunic that they made a couple of weeks ago with the help of Mistress So-and-so, and they say, you know what, I can do a bit of sewing. I reckon I could make that tea tunic. You know, they look at some fighting. They see a person who's a newly authorised fighter, and they think to themselves, you know what, actually, I reckon I could just about beat them. You know, or they see a work colleague who's out there doing some dancing, and they sort of think to themselves, well, that guy's got no coordination whatsoever, but they can do the dancing. I reckon I can learn that as well. So it's important that newcomers are part of the recruitment process because it provides that interface to potential new people. So let's see how this idea of potential member interfacing fits in with our pyramid from earlier. So the first thing we do is we take our pyramid and we turn it upside down. So now I've got a nice broad base of newcomers there, nice little line there, and you can imagine potential members raining down from the top. So if you've got a broad base of that interface, then you're more likely to catch those potential members. It's a pretty simple model, I would quite happily admit, but there's certainly a degree of truth in it. Now let's have a look at households. Households can be really good for new people. They can provide that immediate support network for a newcomer. And this is both a social network as well as an activity network. So someone can join a household, they have an immediate circle of people who are interested in them and want to help them out. They can help them out with their costuming, their first brewing, and so on and so forth. It can also provide multiple centres of activity. So for example, you might go along to training on a Sunday afternoon in your local barony, but then you also go along to household training midweek. So you get to have a whole lot more activity. But there can be a negative side as well. So in sometimes a household may cherry pick the best people, however that's defined, and that can be to the detriment of the greater SCA in some circumstances. Another thing they might do is force a square peg into a round hole. So someone sees the SCA, there's a particular aspect of it that really excites them, they join a household, but that household doesn't really do that thing and they don't encourage it and we don't really do that. And rather than saying, well, actually, I want to do that anyway, they just sort of say, okay, well, I'm just going to conform to the household and I'm not going to do that thing that actually got me interested in the first place. Another thing is negative indoctrination, and this can be quite damaging. So it could be that two households have had some sort of a rivalry in the past and there's been a little bit of bad blood, and somebody new comes along who's had no interaction with those people whatsoever, but they become indoctrinated into the history through their household, and so they end up having a negative opinion of another group of people simply because that's what they've experienced through their household. It's not just people, it can also be activities. I once had a conversation with someone who told me that they didn't like war fighting because they didn't see chivalry on the warfield. Now, I've done a fair bit of war fighting and I would completely and utterly disagree. I think there's lots of chivalry on the warfield and anyone is entitled to their opinion. That's not a problem whatsoever. But in this particular instance, that person had never actually been on a warfield. So when they said, I don't like war fighting because there's no chivalry there, this was because they'd been told by other members of their household that there's no chivalry on the warfield. They never actually got to experience it themselves. Last but not least is that some households can be somewhat mafia-esque, and if someone does decide to leave the household, they get really hurt and we don't talk to you anymore, you decided to leave our household. Let's have some notes on cherry picking. Now, when it comes to recruiting the SCA, you have to spend a certain amount of coin on various activities, seeding activities, to make sure that you've got a crop of potential members flowing through. Now, if you have an environment where households are competing against each other in a negative fashion, then their focus switches from getting people into the SCA as a whole to getting people into their household. So they stop thinking about trying to get potential members at large, and they start looking at the new people and trying to get them into their household. And when that starts happening and it's a negative competitive environment, then no one's going to be investing that coin in the seeding activities, because why would you want to? You can't protect your asset. You might get somebody involved in the SCA and then they get snapped up by someone else's household. If you start going down that path, it's actually not good for the SCA as a whole. Another aspect is who gets cherry-picked. So if we can imagine a situation where, say, 3 people join the SCA as friends and 2 of them get snapped up straight away by a household, then that kind of leaves that third person out. And that could be, then a negative experience for that person. Last but not least is colleges. And colleges are university groups. People typically get involved in a college in their first year of university, but they're only going to be at university for 3 or 4 years. So this year's first year collegians are going to be the people who are running the college, the seneschal and so on and so forth, in 3 or 4 years' time. So if you have a household who is busy cherry picking the collegians, then it means that that person ends up focusing all their SCA activity on the household and not on the college, which isn't a problem, except that in 3 or 4 years' time, there's no collegians left who are actually running the college and keeping that whole ball rolling. I would suggest that ideally, let collegians join the college and be a collegian, and when they leave university, that's when you should have a conversation with them about incorporating them into your household. So there's a number of things that you need to consider when you're forming a new group. First question is it actually a geographical group that you should be thinking about forming? So let's just imagine, for example, that you're part of a geographical group, you play the SCA, and there's lots of people in that group who are all about late period personas. But you're really into Viking, and what you want to do is Viking stuff. So if that's the case, rather than forming a geographical group, what you should probably consider instead is forming a Viking household. And then you should go out and recruit a whole bunch of people, and some of those people will also be interested in Viking stuff, and then you can have more people in your Viking household. The next thing you want to consider is your local catchment area. And by that, I'm talking about the kind of population that you might expect to be able to draw from for recruiting into the SCA. One of my rules of thumb here is 1 hour. So consider where your local centre of activity is going to be, and then consider an hour's travel away from that. That is the catchment area that you are likely to get people from. One of the ways I think of it is that if I am doing midweek training or stitch and bitch or something like that, to hop in the car and drive for an hour, hop on the train, travel for an hour, whatever it might be, to get there for an evening activity, that's okay. I can finish work, travel an hour, go there, spend a couple of hours doing stitch and bitch, and then drive or train home again. If you have to travel 4 hours to get there, you just cannot do it on a frequent basis. So think about rough 1 hour from where your centre is, what sort of population you have in that area. The next thing I think about is what proportion of people in that mundane catchment you're likely to have as potential SCA recruits. And the number that I have in my head there is 1 in 1,000. And there's absolutely no science behind that whatsoever. What that comes from is the times that I've done school demos for a large high school, 500, 800, 1,000 students, and you'll always have, with that sort of a size, at least one kid who's hanging onto the list-filled ropes with their eyes hanging out of their head, and quite clearly they just cannot wait to get involved. It's not a precise science at all. Another thing you want to also consider is the demographic of your local area. Are these people likely to be interested in taking up a new hobby which is all about medieval stuff? So for my particular local area, we have a very high proportion of people coming to this area who are retired. And there's no reason why you couldn't recruit from people who are retired. However, there's a good chance that they've developed all sorts of other hobbies and interests throughout their life that may take precedence. Having said that, a retired person may have a whole bunch more time to pick up on that hobby interest that they always wanted to do, so maybe you can recruit them. That could be awesome as well. Next thing to consider is a bit of a chat with your friends and family to make sure that you've got your head screwed on right, especially SCA friends. So the thing about forming a geographical group is that it chews up an incredible amount of coin. Far more coin than normal participation in the SCA. So if you have a situation where you've just moved to a new town, your first child is going to primary school, you've got twins on your way, your mum's quite ill and needs a lot of care, maybe right now isn't the right time to consider forming a new group. Next thing is commitment and enthusiasm. So as I said, it's going to chew up a lot of your coin. Ask yourself the question, can I commit to that? Because once you go down that path, you either follow it through or it fails. The other thing is your enthusiasm. Can you maintain that enthusiasm? Enthusiasm rubs off on people. And it's important that you're able to maintain that enthusiasm as you go. Last but not least, you have to look after yourself. So you have to have some mechanisms in place to continue with that sanity check and make sure that you're looking after yourself in this whole process. You don't want to burn yourself out. So, some advice for new groups and those people in them. First of all, understand that there is an administrative structure of the SCA and you have to work within that system and structure. So you're going to recruit people, you're going to have some of those new people become officers. They have to undertake those officers' roles. The seneschal is the president, the reeve is the treasurer. There are responsibilities associated with those roles. You have to report every quarter. If you can't do that, then you can't have a group. It's as simple as that. It may be that as you go along, you find yourself thinking, oh, geez, that's not 100% right. I reckon the SCA could work better than that. And my advice to you in that circumstance is keep on trucking and getting your group up and running. And when that's all said and done, and you can sit back and say, whew, that was amazing, I've done that now. You put your hand up for a Kingdom Officer role, and that's when you start working on whatever change it is that you think might be required. Don't try and fight the system. It's going to wear you out, and you're probably not going to win. The next thing is you want to be open and honest, and that is both to the people that you're getting involved in this new group, as well as the SCA as a greater whole. Don't tell people that the SCA is something that it's not about. Be honest with them straight away. Next thing is to document meetings and activities. Now, some of this is mandatory. When people come along to events, they have to sign in. There's no exception to that. You have to do this. Also, you want to document your meetings right from the start. This gives you something to look back on, a framework for moving forwards, and also helps record your history. The next thing is you need to be kind and respectful, and that's both to people coming into this new group as well as to the SCA as a greater whole. You'll have a sponsoring group of some sort. Be respectful of the relationship with that sponsoring group. Last but not least, you need a certain amount of patience. The SCA is a volunteer organisation. So if you send an email off to the Kingdom Seneschal, for example, and you don't get a response straight away, you might just have to wait patiently for a little bit. They have other things they have to do in their lives. This is something they're doing on a voluntary basis. They're not necessarily going to be on beck and call immediately. Okay, now a bit of advice for sponsoring groups. First and foremost, yours is a senior group. You should be setting the example for the new group. And this is in all things, in terms of the culture of the SCA, what the SCA is all about. Also simple things like, say, reporting. You can't exactly peg a person who's learning to be an officer about not reporting on a quarterly basis if you yourself aren't recording on a quarterly basis. Next one, teaching is better than giving. You've all heard the saying, give a man a fish and he'll feed himself for the night. Teach a man to fish and he'll feed himself for the rest of his life. So for example, if a new group is forming, rather than going through your wardrobe and pulling out your old teach uniques that you haven't worn for 15 years and giving it to that group, you might want to consider going to that group and running a workshop on making teach uniques. And that way they're learning the skills and they can pass those skills on and then they can make their own teach uniques. Next thing is that SCA laws have to be abided. However, that new group is free to develop its own culture, and it may be different to the culture in your group, and you should respect that. Another thing is that there's a good chance that something might come up that you don't know the answer to. And when this happens, it's really important that you find out what the actual answer is and not just simply tell them what you think it should be. Because if later on people in that new group find out that actually the information that they were given was not correct, then it casts doubt on the integrity of everything that you've told them. The next thing is that treading water costs coin. And this is really important. And it's sort of the flip side of the bit about patience in my previous slide. So when a group has been established, you're going to have initially a small number of individuals who are going to be spending a lot of coin trying to keep things going. Getting them information, advice, etc., in a timely fashion really does help them out. So be mindful of the fact that while they're in a holding pattern, it's costing them coin. Last but not least, being a sponsoring group is an honour and a privilege. And I think it's actually possibly one of the greatest things to be able to, in the whole growth pattern of a group, is when the time comes that you are part of the process of establishing a new group. So let's have a little bit of a thought about what sort of geographical group you might form and how that could potentially be a point of conflict. And in doing so, we're going to go to my home kingdom of Lockhart, and more specifically, the island state of Paradise. Now, this island state of Paradise has a capital city with about 1 million people, South City here, and the other population centre, which is much smaller, East Said, has about, say, 250,000 people on the other side of the state. So let's just imagine 25 years ago, a group was formed in South City, which has grown to become the Barony of Arsomia. And over time, the state of Paradise has become contiguous with Barony of Arsomia and vice versa. And the expectation of people in the Barony of Arsomia is that any growth in the SCA within that state will fall under the banner, the auspices of the Barony of Arsomia. So let's just imagine somebody decides to start a new group in East Said. They recruit a whole bunch of new people. Then people in Arsomia are probably thinking, well, this is great. They can become a canton of that barony. However, those people in East Said don't have that emotional connection with the Barony of Arsomia. So they're going to be asking themselves the question, well, should we be a canton of a barony or should we be a shire? Now, it's really, really important that that group of people are well informed. So the various advantages of being part of the Barony of Arsomia as a canton has to be discussed and understood. But ultimately, the decision as to which way they might want to go does rest with East Said. And as important as it is that those people understand the decision that they're making, it's equally important that the decision that they make is respected. And now we'll have a look at a few parting notes. First and foremost, there is no golden path. The presentation I've given you today, some of my thoughts, some of the ways I look at things. Hopefully it's been helpful for you, but I won't pretend to believe I have all the answers. And if you find something in there doesn't work for you, doesn't ring true for you, then that's okay. If you're doing something and it's working, then that's all that really matters. The next thing is that just because you're helping out and supporting new people doesn't mean to say that you can actually read their minds. So it's important to have a conversation about what they need, what they want, how you can help them, rather than diving in and doing a whole bunch of stuff and expecting a massive amount of appreciation and gratitude when maybe they might not have actually needed or wanted that in the first place. The next thing is that you may make mistakes, and you should be kind to yourself and forgive yourself, and hopefully those around you will forgive you as well. That advice for new group section was a fair bit of reflection for myself, and to a certain degree there's a bit of a list of things that maybe I would or do differently if I could rewind the clock and do it all again, to some degree at least. Last but not least, at the end you must let go. So you invest your coin into recruiting somebody, getting involved in the SCA, helping them out and all the rest of it. But ultimately they're their own person, and they don't belong to you. So if you're expecting a return of investment in your coin, then you're probably doing this for the wrong reasons. What ideally will happen is that they will develop their own coin and they'll pay it forwards. And in my mind, that's what it's all about. Let's just make it all better and bigger as we go. This goes for groups as well. So if you do all that work in establishing a group and getting it up and running and so on and so forth, and ultimately you leave and then the group falls into a heap straight away, then it means that you probably haven't 100% managed to achieve the mark that you're aiming for. And you should forgive yourself for that as well, by the way. One of the highlights for myself in the SCA was a bit over a decade ago now. I went to a championship weekend at the Barony of Vinyala, did the rounds, caught up with old friends and met a few new people. And one of the people I met that I hadn't talked to before was the new seneschal of the College of St Basil the Great. And I had a little moment there where I thought, oh, I'm going to big note myself here now. And I said, oh, you might have heard of me, I'm Jochen Schwalder. And he said, oh yes, I have heard of you, you're the archer. And you know what, I probably deserve that little bit of a ego deflation there. I am the archer, well, an archer at least. But the key thing there is that the College of St Basil the Great had continued well and truly beyond my involvement with it. And that for me was actually really awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time today. Hopefully you've managed to gain something out of this. If you want to share this video, please do so. If you want to comment, then please do so, and I'll do my best to answer as best I can. And if you want to subscribe and watch my other videos, then that's fantastic as well. Please do so. I'd also like to just do a bit of a thank you for all those people who have helped and assisted me in my adventure in the SCA. So what I'm doing now is built on the backs of other people who have come before me, and they've imparted their advice, their time, and their coin. I'd like to just sing out a thank you to all those people who have helped me in the past, and I look forward to seeing you next time.